I raised my brother since I was 10, but when I refused to pay his rent, he called me a terrible parent. I'm Liam, 29M, and I've been grappling with a complicated situation involving my younger brother Ethan, 22M. Our childhood was far from ideal. Our parents were rarely present, both emotionally and physically. They were always caught up in their own world, leaving me to shoulder the responsibility of caring for Ethan from a very young age. I was only 10 when I first started looking after Ethan. It began innocently enough, making sure he had breakfast before school, helping him tie his shoelaces, and reading him bedtime stories. But as the years went by, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. By the time I was 15, I was essentially running our household single-handedly. Our parents' absence wasn't just neglect, it was a void that seemed to consume everything. Dad was a long-haul truck driver, often away for weeks at a time. When he was home, he was too exhausted to engage with us, usually falling asleep in front of the TV with a beer in hand. Mom worked night shifts at a local factory and slept during the day. On the rare occasions when she was awake and at home, she was irritable and quick to snap at us for the smallest infractions. I remember one particularly bad winter when I was 16. The heating in our house broke down, and our parents were nowhere to be found. I spent days trying to reach them, all while keeping Ethan and myself warm with electric blankets and space heaters. I even learned how to light the old fireplace in our living room, chopping wood from the backyard to keep the fire going. When our parents finally returned, they barely acknowledged the situation, acting as if everything was normal. As we grew older, Ethan became increasingly dependent on me. He'd follow me around the house like a shadow, always seeking my attention and approval. I tried my best to be there for him, but it was exhausting. I felt like I was being pulled in a million directions at once, trying to be a brother, a parent, a student, and somehow still find time to be a teenager myself. When I was 18, I got my first job at a local grocery store. I thought it would be a positive step, a chance to save some money, maybe even start thinking about college. But Ethan didn't see it that way. To him, it was a betrayal, a sign that I was abandoning him just like our parents had. The first week of my job was a nightmare. Ethan called me constantly, claiming he needed me at home for one reason or another. Once, he even showed up at the store, tears streaming down his face, causing such a scene that my manager had no choice but to send me home. I lost that job after just a month due to Ethan's behavior. As Ethan entered his teenage years, his neediness didn't improve. If anything, it intensified. He'd throw tantrums if I spent time with friends or went on dates. He expected me to be available 24/7, just like when we were kids. I tried to explain that I needed my own life, but he couldn't, or wouldn't, understand. I remember one incident when I was 20. I had been seeing a girl, Lisa, for a few months. It was my first serious relationship, and I was excited about it. One night, I had planned a special date with Lisa, dinner and a movie. I had arranged for a neighbor to check in on Ethan, who was 13 at the time. But halfway through dinner, my phone started buzzing nonstop. It was Ethan, calling and texting, claiming he was sick and needed me to come home immediately. I excused myself and rushed home, only to find Ethan perfectly fine, playing video games. When I confronted him, he just shrugged and said he didn't want me to forget about him. Lisa broke up with me shortly after, tired of the constant interruptions and drama. Things came to a head when I was 24. After years of saving every penny I could, I had finally scraped together enough money to move out. I found a small, run-down apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I told Ethan about my plans to move out, he completely lost it. He screamed at me for hours, accusing me of abandoning him just like our parents had. He threatened to hurt himself if I left, saying he couldn't survive without me. It was one of the most harrowing experiences of my life. Despite the guilt eating away at me, I went through with the move. I couldn't keep living that way. I needed space to breathe, to figure out who I was outside of being Ethan's caretaker. But even after I moved out, I couldn't fully break free. I'd send Ethan money every month, draining my meager savings to help him buy clothes, school supplies, or whatever else he claimed he needed. I tried to visit when I could, but every visit turned into a battleground. Ethan would demand more of my time, more money, more everything. He'd beg me to move back home or let him move in with me. I always refused, which inevitably led to massive fights. Last year, Ethan dropped a bombshell. He announced he was going to college. He claimed our parents had suddenly decided to fund his education, which came as a shock to me. They had never offered me any help with furthering my education. In fact, when I had brought up the idea of college years ago, they had dismissed it as a waste of time and money. As soon as Ethan got his dorm assignment, he started pressuring me to visit and buy him things for his room. I scraped together what I could and brought him some basics, bedding, a desk lamp, some school supplies. But it wasn't enough for Ethan. He handed me a list of other things he wanted: a new laptop, a mini fridge, a TV, expensive decorations. When I told him I couldn't afford all that, he exploded, accusing me of not caring about his future. A few months into the semester, Ethan called with news that he dropped out of college and moved in with some friends. He asked me to co-sign a lease for their apartment. I refused, knowing full well that I'd end up responsible for the rent. Ethan was livid, accusing me of not caring about him and wanting him to be homeless. Last week, Ethan called me in tears. He said he and his roommates were being evicted because they hadn't paid rent in months. He begged me to pay their back rent and let him move in with me. I had to say no. I'm married now to Sarah, 27F, and we're expecting our first child. We live in a small 2-bedroom apartment and are already stressed about how we'll manage once the baby arrives. We simply don't have the space or money to support Ethan. Ethan's reaction was explosive. He called me every name in the book, saying I was a terrible brother and that I'd ruined his life. He said I should have been a better parent to him since our real parents had failed. I tried to explain that I was just a kid too, that it wasn't fair to expect me to be his parent. But he wouldn't listen. Now Ethan's been calling and texting nonstop, alternating between angry rants and tearful pleas for help. Sarah thinks I should block his number, at least until after the baby is born. She's worried about the stress affecting my health and the pregnancy. But I feel guilty. Am I wrong for not helping Ethan more? Should I have done things differently? The weight of all these years, all these responsibilities I never asked for, is crushing me. I love my brother, but I'm tired. I'm scared. I'm about to become a father myself, and I don't know how to balance my responsibility to my unborn child with the overwhelming needs of my adult brother. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to save myself, let alone Ethan. Update 1. It's been about a month since my last post, and to say a lot has happened would be an understatement. First, I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. Your comments really helped me gain some much-needed perspective on the situation with Ethan. After several long, emotional conversations with Sarah, I decided it was time to set some firm boundaries with Ethan. It wasn't an easy decision. The guilt I've carried for years kept gnawing at me, but Sarah helped me see that continuing down this path wasn't healthy for anyone, not for me, not for our unborn child, and not even for Ethan. I spent days drafting and redrafting an email to Ethan. I wanted to be clear and firm, but not cruel. In the end, I sent him a long message explaining that while I care about him deeply, I can't be responsible for his life choices anymore. I told him I wouldn't be sending him any more money or letting him move in with us. I also said that if he wanted to have a relationship with me, he needed to respect my boundaries and stop with the guilt trips and manipulation. The night after I sent the email, I barely slept. I kept checking my phone, both dreading and hoping for a response. When it finally came the next morning, it was even worse than I'd feared. Ethan's reply was scathing. He accused me of abandoning him, just like our parents had. He said he hoped my child would treat me the same way someday, that I'd know what it felt like to be cast aside by someone who was supposed to love and protect you. Reading his words felt like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay strong. A week after I sent the email, I received an unexpected call from our parents. Apparently, after I refused to help, Ethan had gone to them. They wanted to know why I wasn't taking care of my brother. I was floored. These were the same people who had left me to raise Ethan when I was just a child myself, and now they were questioning my choices? I ended up having a long, emotional conversation with them. For the first time in my life, I told them exactly how their neglect had affected both Ethan and me. I described the lonely nights when Ethan would cry for them and I, just a child myself, would try to comfort him. I told them about missed parent-teacher conferences, about Christmases and birthdays that went uncelebrated because they were always working. I explained how unfair it was to put so much responsibility on me at such a young age, and how their absence had warped Ethan's understanding of family relationships. To my surprise, they actually listened. My mom broke down crying, saying she had no idea how bad things had been for us. She talked about how she and Dad had always been so focused on providing financially that they lost sight of what we really needed. My dad was quieter, but I could tell he was upset too. He admitted that he'd used work as an escape, unable to handle the pressures of family life. They both apologized for failing us and asked what they could do to make things right. I suggested they start by helping Ethan find a place to live and maybe look into therapy for him. They agreed and said they'd also like to start rebuilding their relationship with both of us. It was surreal, hearing our parents finally take responsibility after all these years. A few days later, Ethan called me. His voice was calmer than I'd heard it in years. He said our parents had helped him find a small studio apartment and were paying his first month's rent. They'd also offered to pay for therapy for him. Ethan apologized for his behavior, saying that talking to our parents had made him realize how unfair he'd been to me. He asked if we could start over and try to have a normal brother relationship. I'm cautiously optimistic. I told Ethan I'd like that, but that it would take time to rebuild trust. We agreed to start with weekly phone calls and maybe meet up for coffee in a few weeks. It's a small step, but it feels like progress. As for our parents, they've been making efforts to reconnect with both of us. They've called a few times to check in, and even offered to help Sarah and me prepare for the baby. It's strange and a little uncomfortable, like trying on clothes that don't quite fit right. But I'm trying to be open to it, for Ethan's sake as much as my own. Sarah and I are still preparing for the baby, and I'm feeling more excited now that some of the stress with Ethan has been resolved. We've started setting up the nursery, picking out colors and furniture. It's a bittersweet process. I'm thrilled about becoming a father, but it also brings up a lot of emotions about my own childhood and the kind of parent I want to be. I know we have a long road ahead of us. Years of dysfunction and hurt feelings can't be erased overnight. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I'm hopeful that Ethan will get the help he needs to become more independent. I'm hopeful that our parents will continue to step up and try to make amends. And I'm hopeful that by the time our child arrives, we'll have a more stable, healthier family situation. It's strange to think about how much has changed in just a month. There are moments when I still feel the weight of guilt and responsibility, when I worry that I'm somehow failing Ethan by enforcing these boundaries. But then I look at Sarah, at her growing belly, and I remember why I'm doing this. I'm breaking the cycle, ensuring that our child won't grow up carrying the same burdens that Ethan and I did. It's not easy, but I know it's the right thing to do. Update 2. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have been progressing. The situation with Ethan has improved, but it hasn't been without its challenges. Ethan has been attending therapy regularly, and it seems to be having a positive impact. He's been more stable in our conversations, and he's started to acknowledge how his past behavior affected me. We've been having our weekly phone calls as agreed, and they've been mostly positive. Sometimes we talk about serious things, like his therapy sessions or our childhood, but other times we just chat about normal brother stuff, movies, sports, or funny stories from our days. About a month ago, we met up for coffee for the first time since everything happened. I was nervous as I walked into the cafe, unsure of what to expect. Would Ethan be angry? Resentful? But when I saw him, he looked different. Calmer, somehow. He'd even gotten a haircut and was dressed neatly, a far cry from the disheveled state he'd been in the last time I saw him. As we talked over our coffees, Ethan shared that he's been working on understanding why he became so dependent on me and how to develop healthier relationships. He told me about exercises his therapist had given him to manage his anxiety and set realistic expectations for others. It was strange but nice to have a conversation with Ethan where I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. However, there was a setback 2 weeks ago. Ethan lost his job at a local restaurant. He'd been working there for a couple of months, and it seemed to be going well. But apparently, there was a conflict with a coworker that escalated, resulting in Ethan losing his temper and getting fired. When Ethan called to tell me about losing his job, I could hear the panic in his voice. He asked if I could lend him money for rent. It was a test of the boundaries we'd set, and I admit I was tempted to give in. The old instinct to protect and provide for Ethan was still there. But instead, I took a deep breath and encouraged him to talk to our parents or look into unemployment benefits. He was upset at first, his voice rising as he accused me of not caring. But I stood firm, reminding him of the boundaries we'd discussed. To my surprise, Ethan called back a few hours later. His voice was calmer, and he actually thanked me for not enabling him. He said he'd reached out to our parents and they were helping him figure out his options. It was a small moment, but it felt like a big step forward. Our parents have been trying to make amends too. They've been more involved with both of us, especially Ethan. They helped him find a job training program that he's excited about. It's in IT, something Ethan has always been interested in but never pursued. They've also been making an effort to connect with me and Sarah, even offering to help set up the nursery for the baby. Last week, Dad came over to help me assemble the crib. It was awkward, to say the least. We've never really done anything like that together before. But as we worked, fumbling with the instructions and laughing at our mistakes, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. Speaking of the baby, Sarah is now 7 months pregnant, and we found out we're having a girl. When we shared the news with the family, Ethan's reaction was telling of his progress. Instead of being jealous or demanding, he seemed genuinely happy for us. He even asked if he could buy something for his future niece, which was a big step for him. He ended up getting her a tiny stuffed elephant, remembering how much I loved elephants when we were kids. Last week, we had a family dinner with our parents and Ethan. It was the first time we'd all been together in years without a major argument breaking out. There were still some tense moments, especially when the topic of our childhood came up. Mom started to cry at one point, apologizing again for not being there for us. It was uncomfortable, but also cathartic in a way. I'm still cautious about fully trusting Ethan or our parents. Years of hurt and disappointment don't disappear overnight. But I'm hopeful. Sarah has been incredibly supportive through all of this, and her perspective has helped me navigate these complex family dynamics. As we get closer to becoming parents ourselves, I'm more determined than ever to break the cycle of dysfunction in our family. I want our daughter to grow up in a loving, stable environment, something Ethan and I never had. It's a daunting task, but seeing the small changes in Ethan and our parents gives me hope that it's possible. There are still moments when I feel overwhelmed by it all, the impending responsibility of fatherhood, the ongoing situation with Ethan, the tentative rebuilding of relationships with our parents. But then I feel Sarah's hand in mine, or I look at the ultrasound picture of our daughter, and I know that no matter what happens, we'll face it together. Update 3, it's been 6 months since my last update, and our lives have changed dramatically. Our daughter, Lily, was born 2 months ago, and she's absolutely perfect. Becoming a father has given me a new perspective on everything, including my relationship with Ethan and our parents. The day Lily was born was a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah was in labor for 18 hours, and I was a nervous wreck the entire time. When Lily finally arrived, all pink and squalling, I felt a love I'd never experienced before. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. To my surprise, one of the first calls I made after Lily's birth was to Ethan. Despite all our past issues, I wanted him to know he was an uncle. His genuine excitement and warmth caught me off guard. He asked if he could visit us in the hospital, and after a quick discussion with Sarah, we agreed. Ethan's visit to the hospital was a moment I'll never forget. He walked in hesitantly, a small gift bag in his hands. When he saw Lily, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. He was gentle with her, almost reverent as he held her tiny hand. We talked for a while, about Lily, about life, about our shared past. There was a new understanding between us, a bridge built by this tiny new life. Ethan has continued to make progress in the months since Lily's birth. He completed his job training program and found a steady job at a local tech company. He's been living independently and hasn't asked me for money in months. His therapist suggested he start journaling, and he's found it really helpful in processing his emotions. He even shared some of his writings with me, stories from our childhood, but from his perspective. It was eye-opening and, at times, painful to read, but it's helped me understand him better. Our parents have also been trying to be more involved. They've visited several times since Lily was born and have been respectful of our boundaries. It's strange to see them in grandparent mode, Dad awkwardly singing lullabies, Mom fussing over Lily's outfits. There are moments when I feel a pang of resentment, wondering why they couldn't have been this way when Ethan and I were young. But then I see the joy on Lily's face when she recognizes them, and I try to let go of the past. Last month, we had a big family gathering for Lily's christening. It was a beautiful day, the kind of family event I never thought we'd have. Ethan asked if he could be Lily's godfather. Sarah and I talked it over and decided to agree. It felt like a way to give him a special role in Lily's life while also acknowledging the progress he's made. During the christening, Ethan gave a short speech that brought tears to my eyes. He talked about how watching me become a father had made him realize how much I'd sacrificed for him when we were younger. He apologized publicly for the way he'd treated me and promised to be the best uncle and godfather he could be to Lily. It was a powerful moment of healing for both of us. Things aren't perfect, of course. We still have moments of tension, especially when old patterns threaten to resurface. I'm still working on fully trusting Ethan and our parents. There are days when the weight of the past feels heavy, when I worry about repeating the mistakes of our parents. But then I look at Lily, at her innocent face and tiny fingers, and I'm filled with determination. I'm committed to giving her the childhood Ethan and I never had, one filled with love, stability, and healthy boundaries. I'm grateful for the chance to rebuild my relationship with my brother and to see him develop a bond with Lily. As I write this, Lily is napping in her crib, and I can hear Sarah humming in the kitchen. Ethan is coming over later to help me put together some furniture for Lily's room. It's a simple, ordinary day, but it feels like a miracle. A year ago, I never would have imagined this was possible. It's been a long, difficult journey, but seeing Ethan hold Lily and knowing that she'll grow up with a loving uncle in her life makes it all worth it. We're not a perfect family, and we probably never will be. We're still learning, still healing, still figuring out how to navigate our relationships. But we're trying, and that's what matters. As I look towards the future, I'm filled with hope, for Lily, for Ethan, for all of us. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see what the future holds for our family.